hammer fell with a sickening thud that echoed through Meridian's dusty town square. Sold to Mr. Cornelius Vex for $800. Kestrel Thorne's horse reared as he spotted the blonde woman being dragged from the auction platform. Iron shackles glinting on her wrists. His blood turned to ice after 3 days of hard riding. He was too late. Aurelia Wildrose, the woman whose letter had burned in his pocket for weeks, had already been purchased like cattle. The auctioneer's voice boomed again. Kestrel dismounted, his spurs jangling. Against the wooden planks, as he pushed through the crowd of leering men and judgmental women, Aurelia's emerald eyes found his across the chaos, widening with recognition and something else, hope, fear, he couldn't tell. "You there, cowboy?" The auctioneer pointed a gavel in his direction. "Biddings closed on that one." Mr. Vex paid fair and square. Cornelius Vex stepped forward, a mountain of a man in an expensive suit that couldn't hide his cruel nature. Gold teeth flashed as he smiled. "Indeed. The woman is mine now, legally and completely." His meaty hand clamped down on Aurelia's shoulder. Making her wince, Kestrel's hand moved instinctively to his Colt .45. "That woman sent me a letter. She's promised to another man." Vex laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "Promises don't mean much when there's debt to pay, boy. This little beauty's father owed me $12,000. She's working it off now, every pretty inch of." Her Aurelia jerked away from his touch, fire blazing in her eyes despite the chains. "I told you, you vile snake. I'd rather die than submit to you. Death ain't profitable, sweetheart. But you will be." Vex signaled to his men 3 armed thugs who stepped closer. "Take her to the wagon. We leave for my ranch within the hour." "Wait." Kestrel's voice cut through the murmur of the dispersing crowd. "I'll pay double what you paid." Vex's eyebrows rose with interest. $1,600? You got that kind of money, Drifter?" Kestrel's jaw tightened. He had exactly $400 to his name, his entire life savings. "Give me until sundown." "I'll get your money sundown." Vex checked his pocket watch with theatrical flourish. "That's for ours, cowboy. And if you don't have my $1,600 by then, the price goes up to $2,000. Deal?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. Aurelia's eyes pleaded silently with Kestrel, her lips mouthing words he couldn't quite catch. The chains around her wrists caught the harsh afternoon sun, a reminder that time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. "Deal," Kestrel spat. In his palm, and extended his hand, Vex did the same, his grip like a vice. "For hours, cowboy. Not a minute more." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "And when you fail and will fail, I'm keeping the woman anyway. Might even let you watch what happens to her." As Vex's men dragged Aurelia toward a waiting wagon, she called out over her shoulder, "Kestrel, the Silver Dollar Saloon." "Ask for a rough hand," clamped over her mouth, cutting off her words. Kestrel stood alone in the emptying square, the weight of an impossible task crushing down on him. $1,600, 4 hours, somewhere in this godforsaken town. The woman he'd fallen in love with through letters was counting on him to perform a miracle. The Silver Dollar Saloon reeked of stale beer and broken dreams. Kestrel pushed through the batwing doors anyway. His boots clicked against the sticky floor as he scanned the room card tables filled with desperate men. Saloon girls with painted smiles, and in the back corner, a game that made his pulse quicken. High-stakes poker. The pile of money in the Senta could solve all his problems. "You looking for someone special, cowboy?" A redhead in an emerald dress sauntered up to him, her eyes calculating. "Or just looking to lose what's left in your pockets?" "Information," Kestrel said, remembering. Aurelia's cut off words. "About a woman who might have worked here. Blonde, green eyes, goes by Aurelia Wildrose." The redhead's expression softened. "Elia. Sweet girl, that one. Worked here singing for tips until her pa's debts caught up." She glanced around nervously. "Name's Scarlet Divine. Rella mentioned a cowboy might come looking. You him?" "I am." She started to tell me something before Vex's thugs shut her up. Scarlet's laugh was bitter. "Yeah, she wanted you to know about the poker game. See that table in the back? Nightly game, minimum buy-in is $200. Winner takes all." Kestrel's heart sank. Even if he could get into the game, 200 was half his stake. How much is in the pot tonight? Near 3,000, last I heard. A couple of cattle barons, a railroad man, and Scarlett's voice dropped to a whisper. Cornelius Vex himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. To save Aurelia from Vex, he'd have to take money from the man's own pocket. And eat in that game? With what? You don't look like you're carrying railroad money? Scarlett studied his worn clothes, the dust on his boots. Kestrel pulled out his father's pocket watch, the only thing of value he owned besides his horse and guns. This was my grandfather's. It's worth at least 150.
Owlet
Examined the intricate silver timepiece, testing its weight. Maybe, but Vex don't play charity poker. You'll need every advantage you can get. She leaned closer. Lucky for you, I know his tells. What's it going to cost me? Nothing. Relia was kind to me when nobody else was. Consider it paying a debt forward. Scarlett's eyes hardened. Us touches his beard when he's bluffing, drums his fingers when he's got a strong hand. And he always orders whiskey before a big bet. The house waters it down, but he don't know. 30 minutes later, Kestrel sat at the green felt table, his heart hammering against his ribs. Across from him, Cornelius Vex smiled like a shark scenting blood. Well, if it ain't the lovesick cowboy. Vex shuffled cards with practiced ease. Come to try your luck at the tables. Smart man knows when he's beat. Deal the cards, Kestrel, said, placing his father's watch and his last $400 on the table. The first hour went badly. Kestrel lost 2 small hands, his stake dwindling to 350. Vex won consistently, his pile growing larger with each deal. But Kestrel watched, learning the man's patterns just as Scarlett had described. Then the cards turned. Full house, kings over tens. Vex touched his beard, bluffing with a pair at best. Kestrel bet heavy and watched the railroad man fold, followed by the cattle barons. Only Vex remained, drumming his fingers on the table. Call, Vex growled, pushing. Forward $500. Kestrel showed his hand. Vex's face darkened as he threw down a pair of jacks. Lucky hand, cowboy? Luck's got nothing to do with it.
The game continued.
Past midnight. With 2 hours until Vex's deadline, Kestrel had fought back to nearly $1,500. Close, but not enough. He needed one more big hand. One. Final miracle, the cards came. 2 aces in his hand, another ace in the flop. 3 of a kind, aces high. Across the table, Vex ordered whiskey and drummed his fingers. This was it. Everything on one hand, raise you $1,000. The words left Kestrel's mouth before he could second-guess himself. Around the table, the remaining players, a nervous bank clerk and a sweating merchant, immediately folded. Only Cornelius. Vex remained, his piggy eyes studying Kestrel's face for any tell. 1,000. Vex's laugh rumbled through the suddenly quiet saloon. Even the piano player had stopped, sensing the tension. That's mighty confident, cowboy. You sure you got the stomach for this kind of money? Kestrel's 3 aces seemed to burn in his hand. Vex had ordered his whiskey watered down. Thanks to Scarlett's tip, and those thick fingers were drumming steadily on the felt. Strong hand. But was it strong enough to beat 3 aces? I see your 1,000, Vex said, pushing forward a stack of bills, and raise you another 500. The blood drained from Kestrel's face. 1,500 total, exactly what he had. Left on the table. If he called and lost, Aurelia would belong to this monster forever. If he folded, he'd still be short of the money needed to buy her freedom. Having second thoughts? Vex's gold teeth glinted. Smart man would fold now, walk away with something. Behind the bar, Scarlett caught Kestrel's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward Vex's hands. Still drumming, still confident. It overconfidence? Call. Kestrel pushed his entire stake into the center of the table. Vex's smile widened as he began to turn over his cards. Full house, 10s over 3 aces. Kestrel laid down his hand. The color drained from Vex's face. As the reality hit him, the saloon erupted in cheers and gasps as Kestrel raked in the massive pot, nearly $3,000, more than enough to buy Aurelia's freedom twice over. You cheated. Vex's voice was a dangerous whisper as he half rose from his chair. Prove it. Kestrel's hand rested casually near his gun. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, sensing violence. Vex's men started to move. But the railroad man, a thin fellow named Mortimer, brass cleared his throat. Game was fair and square, Vex. I watched every deal. Boy won honest. For a moment, Kestrel thought Vex might draw anyway. Then the fat man's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine. You got your money, Cowboy. But the deal stands 1600 by sundown, or the price goes up. About that, Kestrel stood slowly, his winnings safely tucked away. I'm changing the terms. I can and I am. Kestrel's voice carried the authority of a man with nothing left to lose. $2,000, cash, right now, for the woman and cancellation of all her father's debts. Vex's eyes narrowed. That wasn't our deal. New deal. Take it or leave it? Kestrel's hand hovered over his Colt. Because if you refuse, I'm going to start asking questions around town about how you conduct your business. Might be folks would be interested to know how you collect on debts. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Everyone knew Vex's reputation: loan sharking, intimidation, worse things whispered about but never proven. But a gambling debt paid, in full, witnessed by half the town, that was different. 2,000, Vex repeated, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Plus, she walks out of here free and clear. No claims, no debts, no nothing. A long moment passed. Then Vex reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, the debt document that had put Aurelia on the auction block. 2,000. I want it all now, in front of witnesses. Kestrel counted out the bills slowly, making sure every dollar was accounted for. Mortimer Brass, you witnessing this transaction? I am indeed. The railroad man nodded. Mr. Vex is receiving $2,000 in exchange for one, Miss Aurelia Wildrose, and the cancellation of all debts owed by her or her family. Vex snatched the money and crumpled the debt paper, tossing it into a nearby spittoon. She's yours, Cowboy.
Ow.
But don't think this is over between us. It is unless you make it otherwise. Kestrel touched his hat brim. Now, where is she? Vex jerked his head toward the back of the saloon. Wagon behind the building. My boys are watching her. As Kestrel headed for the rear door, Scarlet caught his arm. Be careful.
Guess.
Don't like losing. And he's got mean friends. Thanks for the help with his tells.
Like me.
By getting that girl out of town fast. Vex might honor the letter of your deal, but I wouldn't bet on the spirit.
The wagon?
Sat in the alley behind the silver dollar, its canvas cover concealing whatever cargo lay within. Two of Vex's thugs lounged nearby, bottles in hand, their attention focused more on drinking than guarding. Kestrel approached cautiously, his hand ready to draw. Evening, boys. The larger thug, a scarred brute with arms like tree trunks, squinted at him through the darkness. You lost, Cowboy.
Yes.
Here's private business. Not anymore. Kestrel pulled out the crumpled debt paper he'd retrieved from the spittoon, along with Vex's signed receipt. Your boss just sold me his interest in the cargo. Check with him if you want. The second thug, wiry and mean-looking, spat tobacco. Juice into the dirt. We ain't seen nothing in writing. Then let's go ask Vex together. Kestrel's voice carried just enough threat to make both men reconsider. From inside the wagon came a soft voice, strained but defiant. Kestrel, is that you? It's me, Aurelia. Everything's going to be all right now. The scarred thug started to object, but his partner grabbed his arm. Through the saloon's back window, they could see Vex settling up with the house, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Ah, hell, the wiry man muttered. Come on, Brutus. If the boss sold her, she ain't our problem anymore. They shuffled off toward the saloon's back entrance, leaving Kestrel alone with the wagon. Climbed up and pulled back the canvas cover. Aurelia sat with her back against wooden crates, her wrists still bound by iron shackles, but her green eyes blazed with undiminished spirit, and when she saw him, Her face transformed with relief and something deeper. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "Your letters. They gave me hope when I had none." Kestrel examined the shackles. Heavy iron things meant more for intimidation than security. "These have to go. Hold still." He pulled a small lockpick from his Buddhist skill learned during harder times and worked at the mechanism. The first shackle clicked open within seconds. The second took a bit longer. "How?" Aurelia rubbed her freed wrists, wincing at the red marks the iron had left. "Man learns all sorts of things when he's been on his own as long as I have." Kestrel helped her down from the wagon, noting how she swayed slightly from exhaustion and fear. "Kestrel, I need to tell you something." Her voice was urgent. "Those letters I sent you, they weren't just loneliness talking. I meant every word." He turned to face her fully in the moonlight. Even after her ordeal, even with dirt on her dress and fear in her eyes, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "So did I, every damn word." His hand cupped her cheek gently. "But we need to get out of town. Vex might honor our deal, but his men might not." Aurelia nodded, then suddenly stiffened. "My horse. They took Starfire when they arrested me for the debt. She's in the livery stable, but we'll get her. But first, we need supplies." Kestrel glanced around the alley, planning their escape. "Can you ride hard if we have to?" "I've been riding since I could walk, but Kestrel ... She hesitated. "There's something else. The reason my father's debt was so large. He wasn't just gambling, he was trying to buy back our family's ranch. Vex has been systematically destroying every family in this county, forcing them into debt, then taking their land for pennies on the dollar." Kestrel's jaw tightened. "How many families?" "At least a dozen. The Hendersons, the McCluris, the Prescotts. All gone. Their children scattered, their land absorbed into Vex's holdings." Aurelia's hand found his arm. "I wanted to tell you in my letters, but I was afraid you'd think I was just looking for a savior." "You were never looking for a savior, Aurelia. You were looking for a partner." He kissed her forehead softly. "And partners stand together against men like Vex." A sound from the saloon made them both freeze raised voices, chairs scraping, the unmistakable sound of trouble brewing. "Time to go," Kestrel said, taking her hand. "We'll get our horses and supplies, then figure out what to do about Vex and his land grab." "Our horses?" Aurelia smiled despite their circumstances. "I like the sound of that." They made their way through the shadows toward the livery stable, to people bound by more than just shared danger. Behind them, the argument in the saloon grew louder, and Kestrel suspected their troubles with Cornelius Vex were far from over. But for the first time since riding into Meridian, he felt something other than desperation. With Aurelia at his side, he felt hope. The livery stable sat dark and quiet at the edge of town, its weathered boards silvered by moonlight. Kestrel and Aurelia moved carefully between the stalls, searching for both their horses among the dozen. "Animals housed there," Starfire Aurelia whispered, and a beautiful paint mare whinnied softly in response. "There you are, girl." Kestrel found his own mount, a sturdy buckskin named Thunderand, began saddling both horses quickly. "We'll head north toward the canyon country. I know places we can lay low while we figure out our next move." "About that," Aurelia's voice was thoughtful as she stroked her mare's neck. "Running won't solve anything. Vex will just keep destroying families, and we'll be looking over our shoulders forever." "What are you suggesting?" Before she could answer, the stable door burst open, and torchlight flooded the space. Cornelius Vex stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 armed men, his face twisted with rage. "Did you really think I'd let you ride away into the sunset, Cowboy?" Kestrel's hand moved to his gun, but stopped when he saw the rifles trained on them. "We had a deal, Vex. Witnessed and paid in full. That was before I learned who you really..." Our Vex stepped closer, his torch casting dancing shadows on the stable walls. "Kestrel Thorne, son of Judge Marcus Thorne, the man who sent my brother to prison 15 years ago." The name hit like a physical blow. Kestrel hadn't used his father's name in years, had been running from that legacy since the day he turned 18. "My brother died in that prison, boy. Died because your righteous father couldn't see past the letter of the law to show mercy." Vex's voice dripped with old hatred. and now his son shows up in my town, thinking he can waltz in here and steal what's mine. Aurelia stepped closer to Kestrel, her chin raised defiantly. I was never yours to steal, you pig. Oh, but you were. Sweetheart, see, I've been planning this for months. Your father's debt, the auction, all of it designed to draw out Judge Thorne's boy. Vex smiled cruelly. I figured he'd come running to save his lady friend, and I was right. So what now? Kestrel kept his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. You kill us both? I won't bring your brother back. No, but it'll balance the scales. Vex gestured to his men. Take them to the old mine shaft outside town. Make it look like an accident in stable ground, Caven. Very tragic. As Vex's thugs moved forward, Aurelia suddenly lunged toward the nearest torch bracket, knocking the flame into a pile of dry hay. Fire spread instantly, causing the horses to panic and rear in their stalls. Run. She shouted to Kestrel as chaos erupted. In the confusion of smoke, flame, and terrified animals, Kestrel drew his Colt and put 2 bullets into the nearest gunman. Aurelia had somehow gotten hold of a pitchfork and was holding off another attacker, while thunder kicked out at anyone who came too close. This way. Kestrel grabbed Aurelia's hand and they dove through a window at the back of the burning stable. They hit the ground hard and rolled, coming up running as bullets whined overhead. Behind them, the stable was becoming an inferno, but Kestrel could hear Vex screaming orders to his remaining men. The church, Aurelia gasped as they sprinted through the back alleys of Meridian. Pastor Williams will help us. They reached the small wooden church just as more shots rang out behind them. The pastor, awakened by the gunfire and smell of smoke, opened the door in his nightshirt. Aurelia. Child, what's happening? Cornelius Vex is trying to kill us, she said breathlessly. We need sanctuary. Pastor Williams' weathered face hardened. That devil has terrorized this town long enough. Come in, both of you. As they stumbled into the church, Kestrel could see the livery stable burning like a beacon in the night. How many people in this town would stand up to Vex if they had the chance? More than you'd think, the pastor replied grimly. He's made enemies of half the county with his land grabbing and debt collecting. Aurelia turned to Kestrel, her eyes bright with determination. Then maybe it's time we gave them that chance. Outside, they could hear Vex's men spreading out through the town, searching. But inside the church, plans were forming that would change everything. Pastor Kestrel said quietly, how fast can you get word to the families Vex is wronged? By dawn, if needed. Why? Because it's time to end this. One way or another. Dawn broke over Meridian like a revelation, painting the sky in shades of justice and retribution. Word had spread through the night, via a network of wives, children, and trusted friends. Every family that Cornelius Vex had wronged, every person he'd cheated or threatened, was gathering at the church. Kestrel stood at the pulpit, looking out at nearly 50 faces filled with years of suppressed anger and fear. Farmers, shopkeepers, widows, young men who'd lost their inheritances, all victims of one man's greed. You all know why we're here, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the small building. Vex has been bleeding this town dry for years, hiding behind lawyers and bought officials. But today, we have a chance to end it. Mortimer Brass, the railroad man from the poker game, stood up from a back pew. What you're suggesting sounds like vigilante justice, son. It's a dangerous road. More dangerous than letting him continue? Aurelia rose from beside Kestrel, her voice ringing with passion. How many more families will he destroy? How many more children will grow up homeless because of his greed? An older woman, Mrs. Henderson, whose farm had been seized just last month, spoke up tearfully. My husband built that farm with his own hands. 40 years of work, gone because we couldn't make one payment during the drought. Similar stories poured out. The McClures had lost their cattle ranch. The Prescotts had been forced to sell their general store for a fraction of its worth. Young Timothy Walsh's father had killed himself rather than face the shame of losing the family homestead. The law hasn't protected any of us, added Jake McClure, his hands clenched into fists. Sheriff Morton's in Vex's pocket, and the territorial judge won't hear cases against him. Pastor Williams stepped forward. There is another way. The territorial governor is coming through next week for the railroad dedication. If we could present him with evidence of Vex's crimes. Evidence that Vex would burn before we could present it, Kestrel said grimly. And how many more families would he destroy while we waited for territorial justice? They could see smoke still rising from the burned livery stable. During the night, Vex's men had also set fire to the newspaper office, emanating the one local voice that might have spoken against him. Suddenly, the church doors burst open. Cornelius Vex strode in with 10 armed men, their guns drawn and ready. Well, a prayer meeting. Vex's voice dripped with mock reverence. How touching. All of Meridian's losers gathered in one place. The crowd instinctively pressed back, but Kestrel stepped forward. This is holy ground, Vex. You have no business here. I have business wherever I say I have business, boy. Vex's eyes swept the assembled townspeople with contempt. And my business today is making examples. Pastor Williams moved to stand beside Kestrel. You'll not shed blood in God's house, Cornelius? God? Vex laughed harshly. Where was God when these people signed their contracts? Where was God when they gambled away their futures? His voice rose to a roar. I am the only God in this valley. And today, you're all going to learn what happens when you forget that. He raised his hand to signal his men, but before he could give the order, a new voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned to see a man in a badge and territorial marshal's uniform standing in the doorway, flanked by 6 federal deputies. Marshal Cain Ravencrest was a legend in the Territoria, man who'd brought justice to the wildest corners of the frontier, Marshal Vex said, his confidence faltering slightly. This is a local matter, outside your jurisdiction. Mail fraud, intimidation, conspiracy to commit murder, those are federal crimes, Mr. Vex. Ravencrest stepped into the church, his deputies spreading out to cover the exits, especially when they crossed territorial lines. Vex's face went pale. You have no proof of any of that. Actually, I do. The marshal held up a thick folder. 3 months of investigation, triggered by complaints filed with the territorial government. Seems you've been forging documents, bribing officials, and threatening federal mail carriers. Kestrel felt Aurelia's hands slip into his as they watched justice finally catch up with Cornelius Vex. Furthermore, Ravencrest continued, any contracts or debts obtained through illegal means are hereby declared null and void. All property seized under such contracts will be returned to its rightful owners. The church erupted in cheers and tears of relief. Vex looked around desperately as his own men began laying down their weapons rather than face federal charges. This isn't over, he snarled at Kestrel as the deputies moved to arrest him. The Thorne family owes me a blood debt. The only debt here has been paid in full, Kestrel replied quietly. Ate by justice. As Vex was led away in chains, the crowd began to disperse, families finally free to return to their reclaimed homes. But Kestrel and Aurelia remained in the church, holding each other close. Is it really over? She whispered. This part is, he said, kissing her forehead. But we've got a future to build together. 3 months later, autumn sun cast golden light through the windows of the newly rebuilt church as Aurelia Wildrose prepared to become Aurelia Thorne. The entire town of Meridian had turned out for the wedding, not just to witness a union of love, but to celebrate the rebirth of their community. You look radiant, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, adjusting the simple white dress that had belonged to Aurelia's mother. Your parents would be so proud. Aurelia smiled, though her eyes misted slightly. Papa always said I'd marry for love, or not at all. I think he'd approve of Kestrel. Outside, she could hear the sound of voices and laughter. With Vex's criminal empire dismantled and his stolen properties returned, Meridian was flourishing again. The Henderson farm was producing record crops. The McClure ranch was rebuilding its herd. The Prescotts had reopened their general store. A soft knock came at the church office door. Aurelia, it's time, Pastor Williams called gently. She took a deep breath, checked her reflection one final time, and stepped out into the main church. The sight that greeted her made her heart soar. Every pew was packed with friends and neighbors' people, who had stood together against tyranny and won. Children held wildflowers picked from the meadows, their faces bright with joy. At the altar, Kestrel waited in his best suit, his eyes shining with love and promise. As she walked down the aisle, Aurelia remembered the desperate woman who had penned those first letters to a stranger, hoping against hope for rescue. But the woman walking toward her future now wasn't the same person. She had found not just love, but her own strength, her own voice, her own power. Marshal Ravencrest, who had stayed in town to see justice fully served, stood as one of Kestrel's witnesses. Scarlet Devine, now the respectable owner of a boarding house, served as Aurelia's maid of honor. Dearly beloved Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. We are gathered here today not just to witness the union of two souls, but to celebrate the triumph of love over adversity, of hope over despair, of justice over tyranny. The ceremony was simple but profound. When it came time for vows, Kestrel took Aurelia's hands and spoke from his heart. Aurelia, I came to this town to save you, but you saved me instead. You showed me that running from the past isn't living, it's just existing. With you, I want to build something lasting, something worthy of the love you've given me. Tears ran freely down Aurelia's cheeks as she replied, Kestrel, you gave me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, and love when I thought I was unworthy of it. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with every breath I take. Pastor Williams beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft, tender, and filled with promise. Around them, the church erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very foundations. Later, at the reception in the town square, Kestrel and Aurelia danced to fiddle music under the stars. The same square, where she had been auctioned like property, now celebrated her freely chosen love. Any regrets? Kestrel asked as they swayed together. Only that we didn't meet sooner, Aurelia replied, resting her head against his shoulder. What about you? Ready for a lifetime of adventures with a stubborn woman who writes too many letters? I'm counting on those letters, he laughed, especially when I'm away checking on the ranch hands or helping other towns deal with men like Vex. They had decided to stay in Meridian, using the reward money from Vex's capture to buy a small ranch outside town. But more than that, it found their calling in helping other communities stand up to corruption and tyranny. As the evening wound down, Marshal Ravencrest approached them. Congratulations, you two. You've given this town something it hadn't had in years, hope. We gave each other the same thing, Kestrel replied, his arm tightening around his wife. Speaking of which, the marshal continued, I've got reports of similar situations in other territories. If you're interested in making your fight against corruption official, Aurelia and Kestrel exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in a look. We're interested, Aurelia said firmly. But we work together as equal partners. Wouldn't have it any other way, Ravencrest smiled. The frontier needs more couples like you. As the night deepened and the last guests departed, Kestrel and Aurelia walked hand in hand to their new home, a modest farmhouse with a wide porch that overlooked rolling hills and endless sky. Mrs. Thorne, Kestrel said, testing the name on his tongue as they stood on their front steps. I like the sound of that, Aurelia smiled, then pulled a folded letter from her dress pocket. I have something for you. Kestrel unfolded the paper, recognizing her elegant handwriting immediately. But this letter was different, not desperate or pleading, but filled with joy and promise, my dearest husband. It began, by the time you read this, we will be married and beginning our greatest adventure together. I wanted you to know that you didn't just save me from Cornelius Vexu, saved me from a life of settling for less than I deserved. You showed me that real love isn't about rescue. It's about choosing to face the world together, as equals, as partners, as two souls who make each other stronger. Keep reading, Aurelia whispered as Kestrel's eyes grew misty. I promise to write you a letter every year on our anniversary. Not because I need saving, but because I want to celebrate all the ways we continue to save each other. All the ways. We continue to grow, to fight for justice, to build something beautiful together. You rode into town to save me, my love, but the truth is, we saved each other. And we'll keep doing it every day for the rest of our lives. Forever yours, Aurelia. Thorn Kestrel folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket, right next to his heart. "A letter every year?" "Every year," she confirmed. "Think you can handle a lifetime of my stubborn correspondence?" Instead of answering with words, Kestrel swept his wife into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their new home. Through the window, the lights of Meridian twinkled like stars, a town reborn through the power of people who refused to give up on each other. And somewhere in the distance, Thunder and Starfire grazed peacefully in their pasture, two horses who had carried their riders toward love, justice, and a future bright with infinite possibility. The cowboy had ridden into town to save her. But in the end, they had saved each other and found that some stories don't end with riding off into the sunset. The best ones end with building a sunrise. Together, day after day, year after year, letter after letter, for as long as love endures, which for Kestrel and Aurelia Thorn would be forever.